Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us on Tips Talk Online with Oscar RC. This is a platform where we meet and discuss various topics that are very essential, to our lives. So we touch on social issues to academic issues, career issues, business, spiritual stuff. So we just discuss all matters that concern us as people, as human beings. So this month of June, we're focusing on writing, publishing, all types of writings that you can think of. We're talking publishing, we're inspiring people to become readers. So that's our focus for this month. And today it's a special day where we are focusing on academic writing. So we've got brilliant minds that we having with us here, great men that are going to be sharing with us. So we look forward to an amazing engagement. To all our viewers on Facebook, good afternoon to you and welcome on Tips Talk with Oscar RC. And it's amazing. We so many of us here on Zoom, and we're looking forward to a great engagement. Today's topic is academic writing. And as we start off, our guests are ready, and we're going to give this time to them. They're going to take us through quite a lot of information. So if you've got any question on Facebook, just make sure you put it on the comment box. For those on Zoom, if you've got any question, make sure that you just put it on the chat box. Then we take it from there. I've been having questions, people asking, are you recording? Yes, everything is being recorded, and you can be able to access these videos on my Facebook page, Oscar RC, and on my YouTube channel, Oscar Rufaro. You can be able to get these videos. They are right there once we are done. So for now, I'm going to hand over this time to Mr. Brian. He will introduce himself and just share with us his experience with academic writing. So over to you, Mr. Brian. Mr. Brian, are you there?
Sorry, I had muted my mic.
Yes, over to you, sir.
Afternoon to you, host Professor Netswera, Professor Hanyane, and the audience. I am Brian Mokgatetswa. I currently lecture at TUT. I'm a PhD candidate as well. I'm doing PhD in Business Administration with Northwest University. And we also run a postgraduate research business called Postgraduate Research Institute. Yeah, so basically my studies at the moment are stuck because of COVID, but yeah, it's one of those things. Yeah, I think I'll talk some more as we proceed when questions come through.
All right. No, thank you so much, Mr. Brian. Just before I pass on to Professor Berry, I just want to ask you, can you just give us a brief, maybe in a minute, how your organization works?
Okay, so in simple terms, what we do is that we assist students who need any form of assistance with regards to their postgraduate studies. Remember, there are times whereby a student has a problem with a lecture, with their supervisor, and there's just a disconnect with regards to their relationship. So at times, as much as a student is trying to put some weight into their studies and to do what is required, but there's at times there are disconnections between them. So what we try to do is that we come in as a so-called external supervisor who assists informally, but at the end of the day, our focus is to ensure that your study as a student becomes successful.
Wow. No, that's great. And so much work that you're doing there. Professor Berry, over to you.
Thank you, colleagues. It's good to be in a warm office, engaging everyone else in this chilly weather. And of course, allowing a very interesting topic on academic writing to provide that much needed warmth as well as assurance that all the challenges that we face, especially at postgraduate level, are challenges that are not necessarily insurmountable, but rather are challenges that are there to build scholarship. And rightly so, I'd like to believe this is one of a number of workshops that we must engage one another with, and for various reasons. I take it your audience comes from a different discipline background. Some come from a discipline, public management and governance. Some call themselves public administration, and all other disciplines that are related to that. And I think as we move forward, we should be able to cater for everyone. I take it this is an introductory. We haven't dealt with the gist yet. Is that correct? Can Oscar hear me? Oscar, I think we've lost him. So as we wait for his reconnection, I would like to talk about the connection between...
Yes, I can hear you, Professor.
Oh, okay. I'm not sure, are we doing intro right now before we get into the gist? We seem to be losing each other. All right. Given that, I would like to structure my contribution in appreciating the mechanics of research. I'd like to speak to academic writing as a component of a research design that postgraduate students must undertake at all times. So in essence, whatever you research on, given certain requirements, such as the scholarly expectations, the passion that one has for a particular topic, the choice of a topic, and all other related issues must be linked with the act of writing. And I'd like to speak to that. I'd also like to speak to the do's and don'ts of academic writing. And then lastly, the basic academic writing requirements, focusing on issues of technicality and eventually the issues of presentation. So that will be my focus once everyone else has introduced himself. And I dare say that the presenters today are males. I don't know whether testosterone has something to do with winter or it's just patriarchy revealing its ugly face.
Yeah,
thank you for having me here.
Yeah, over to you, Prof Netswera.
Okay, thank you very much, Oscar. Thank you, Professor Hanyane. My name is Netswera, and I am an academic, so I do academic writing a lot. And I also, at the same time, do supervise postgraduate students, master's, doctoral students. I'm currently the executive dean of the management faculty at the Durban University of Technology. I think in as far as academic writing is concerned, there are quite a lot of interventions that I've managed to put together before historically. Some of those include putting together workshops where one mentors and guide on hands students as they write their proposals, write their dissertations, write publications for journals or chapters for books. So those are some of the most important things that we will be talking about. But also, at one stage, I managed UNISA Press, which is a publication house. And at that press, what we did was guide those aspiring writers. Not everybody who comes to the press is a seasoned writer. So you've got to guide them by hand, especially those that are writing for the first time, because the level of confidence might not be at the level required. You've got to show them how documents are edited, formatted, and the writing language usually differs from spoken language, and all of those things are very important. Thanks, Oscar. I'm going to leave it at that for introduction.
Wow, thank you so much, gentlemen, for all the introduction. So I'm gonna go back to you, and starting with you, Professor Berry. Just share with us how have been your journey in writing. That's the first thing. Secondly, as your journey has been going on, what are the key challenges you faced, and how have you dealt with them? Because I think if you can check, most of the people that we have, especially here on Zoom, they are aspiring to get to where you are. They are still to accomplish quite a lot of works. So just, a brief of your journey, where you started, the key challenges you faced, and how you've dealt with them. And I'm gonna spread the same question to, our other panelists. Just after Professor Berry finishes, take it on, gentlemen, and let's just tackle that question.
Yeah. Look, I think the first question would want to trace one's historical exposure to beginning by appreciating that this starts as a hobby, right? You cannot find and put yourself at postgraduate level, and this is my humble submission, if the passion to read does not exist. But that passion is usually complemented with the sense of inquisitiveness, either basic or scientific, to really want to understand one's world, and you begin with the immediate world. The immediate world might be, and not necessarily confined to your schooling days, from basic primary, where obviously you are encouraged to read and write, all the way to high school years, where if you belong to my generation, one way to propose to a girl was to write a poem. And it is such elementary, rudimentary experiences that you don't overnight throw it away. It sharpens one's mind, it opens one's vocabulary, which then becomes the basis of numerous tools in terms of when to use certain words, when to use metaphors if you want to explore that space. One of the profound professors in education in this country who managed to mentor me around 2005, 2006 season, Professor Elizabeth Hanyane. And I still continue advising my students to expose themselves to her writings. As much as ideologically we differ with her, in the end, we were able to make peace, because that's what scholars do. Scholars are able to provoke one another in terms of thinking, in terms of ideological prescripts, and so forth. And Hanyang's approach is that more often than not, we tend to undermine the power of storytelling. She refers to this as a vignette. And I've always asked my postgrad students, masters and PhD, to always think behind their research protocols, that each time they submit a research proposal, be it a dissertation or a thesis, they need to tell a story. And that story is a story that begins then to build some kind of a scientific revelation of sorts that one can then in the end refer to as a research proposal. First track that we were taught at varsity, especially at first year level, how we should write an assignment, right? And since then, and I must confess my sins here, I hated lecture theaters, right? All those sessions, I could not withstand that. So I ran first year to UNISA and I finished my PhD at UNISA because I understood the power of independence. And a lot of our candidates don't want to exploit that space. In the last discussion, we spoke about the need to understand oneself in terms of strength, in terms of weaknesses. For instance, which part of the day are you able to amass energy that in turn can be used to propel you to a position where you are able to read more and write more in turn? That is important. And in the early years of my varsity life, I understood that importance. But most importantly, I understood what I would now refer to as reverse order writing technique. So when you write that assignment, you don't start with the introduction. You spend 80% of your time looking for sources, reading through those sources, and obviously categorizing those sources. I call that the Hanyane 3-box technique. The first box is critical reading. The second box is your moderate critical reading. And the last box is not so important reading. It is important because it allows you to generate ideas, but you're not going to use it extensively in the referencing part of your text. So one was exposed to that from that early age. And you would then, after reading 80% of your time, sit down the remaining 20%, start writing and edit your work. More often, we forget to be critical of our work. I'm submitting this to Prof Netswera next week. I haven't edited the work. I've abused the comma. Some of the things, by the way. I've referred to the first person and not the second person. All those little mistakes. Prof Netswera must deal with that. Because after all, I've got a deadline to submit. So we were exposed to that from early age to say, prior to submission, switch off, become the reader and not the writer. So you've got to wear a number of hats at the same time and become your own editor before you submit your work to your intended office. So eventually, you need to summarize the text, obviously, provide constantly and update that, your list of sources. Once you are satisfied, you will then sit down and say, where is my introduction? Reflect on the text. The introduction must reflect the text. And I always ask my students, what are you going to have for supper? And most of them will say, I don't know. So I would then reflect on that and say, let's use that as a point of reference. Don't commit to an introduction if the text does not exist. So don't tell me you're going to have Semp and Muhodu because it's cold. And yet, as you leave campus, you might be seduced by the aroma coming from your local KFC and decide to detour and buy your KFC. So get access to food first, then commit to everyone else and say, this is what I have on the table. So that's important. And once you've done that, then you can work on your table of contents. So again, the same technique can be applied when one considers writing research proposals for master's and PhD in this instance, especially the 80-20 rule. We cannot let go of that. When I receive a research proposal, I look at the research design. I look at the problem statement, obviously the topic first, then the problem statement. the research questions or objectives, and the methodology. If the three components do not talk to one another, then we have a first problem. The second problem is sentence construction, obviously. And let's accept most Black postgraduate students, and I've qualified that, Black, use English as a second language, which brings with it a lot of challenges. When do you use a verb? When do you use a noun? How do you use active tense? All of that is important. And one needs here to go back to people like Brian and others to say, where is that workshop on academic writing that exposes us to sentence construction, basic sentence construction? But from my side, I will then tell my students, look, avoid abusing the comma. Okay? Very often, that's the biggest cardinal sin that you get to see. And such an abuse comes in a form of having one sentence occupying 4 to 5 lines. Something is wrong there. So a lot of our postgraduate students, when they write, they don't write for the reader. They write for themselves. And that creates a problem going forward. So I've touched on 2 issues that you've raised, both the historical element to it, right? The privilege that one had since 2005, 2006, coming across people like Elizabeth Henning, people like Adam Habib, Jonathan Johnson, being schooled by the great minds in this country through the SENPED program. And of course, applying these techniques and sharing these techniques and using these techniques going forward to assess research protocols. A research proposal that is done hastily will always present poor language nuances, poor sentence construction, no thread, right? Flow of argument. In one paragraph, there are so many things introduced or discussed. And I always tell students, one issue or sub-issue per paragraph. And make sure that you take the reader into your confidence as you tell that story. Obviously, templates would differ from one university to another, from one faculty to another. Some universities prefer dissecting further the research design area into specific subheadings. Some universities prefer keeping it straight and simple. We've got to adhere to that, because that in itself has a profound influence in influencing the final product that must be presented before a potential supervisor. I work on the notion that you first submit to the faculty/department and it gets assessed. And once it meets certain standards, a supervisor is then appointed. And rightly so, Brian alluded to it. There must be a relationship between a student and a supervisor. And that relationship must be maintained throughout. And I must invite your audience to look at one of my publications titled Measuring the Level of Preparedness of Postgraduate Students in the Discipline of Public Administration, where I raise a number of issues. And one of those issues that come to my mind vividly is the ideological differences between students and supervisors. You will come across a supervisor who is not comfortable to appreciate a quantitative study. And yet your research problem overall might want you to venture into that space. How do you accommodate those differences? And it cannot be that a supervisor must overwhelm the student with a perspective just because he or she feels comfortable, and thereby distorting the trajectory and the perspective of the student. So I'm going to leave it at that for now. and back to you guys.
Your mic is off, Oscar. Oscar's mic is off.
Okay.
Okay. Well, look, let's continue since this might take some time. All right. So I'm going to try and respond to the question that has been raised by saying the following: that a lot of people get their first level of exposure to writing when they start writing their master's dissertation. I can safely say 80 to 90% of people who do write start writing independently at that particular level. There are very few who do write out of the ordinary because they are just interested in writing. Very few. Majority start writing when they are writing their masters and thereafter their doctoral dissertation. Now, a lot of people who have started writing at the level of a master's dissertation, like myself, would be very embarrassed to go back and peruse their master's dissertation. I mean, the other day I took my master's dissertation and perused through. I couldn't believe that I wrote the garbage that I saw in that dissertation. The language, the grammar, the sentence construction, everything was just wrong. And I was asking myself, how did this come about? So at that stage, we still haven't amassed the necessary skills to write. But like Professor Hanyane said, writing is a vocation. And it becomes a lifestyle over time as you write. And you start enjoying it, you start writing on a regular basis, you start even observing problems when you walk around, problems that requires attention, either by yourself or by your students, or so if I get into my computer, I might find I've got 13, 14 draft research topics and problems that I've observed. I don't know who to give these to so that they can undertake the study. But because your mind gets tuned into identifying issues, identifying problems, that becomes your lifestyle. When you walk around, you see people sitting by the street corner, unemployed. That is a research problem for you. And you start asking yourself questions that you think ought to be asked, ought to be answered. So the more you read, the more it tunes your thinking capacity and the way you view the world, and those ideas start flowing. So writing is indeed an art. Writing in itself is an art which you can perfect over time. And the other equally important element to consider is, what is it that you are writing for? Because we write differently when we write for different mediums. If somebody is writing, for argument's sake, to a newspaper, or writing to a journal, writing for a book as a book chapter, whether it's an edited book, whether it's a non-edited book, all of those things becomes extremely important. There's a difference between an academic and non-academic books. So all of the, and writing for a dissertation, a master or doctor, all of those elements are extremely important, because the style with which you use when you write becomes different. Now, if you were to pick up a novel and compare it to how a journal article is constructed, you will immediately realize that there's a big difference. The use of language, the use of style, the use of referencing, and many other writing requirements vary and differ dependent on who you are writing for, your audience, and the medium that you are using in order to pass through that particular message. Now, there is a lot that is written about writing styles, because writing styles also are influenced by the medium that you utilize when you do write. At times, we use exploratory writing styles. At times, we use narrative or descriptive writing styles. Sometimes you use persuasive writing styles. So all of these writing styles are indeed informed by what you're writing, who you're writing for, so that you don't miss the audience. Now, this becomes a big challenge, and this is a critique usually against academic writing, that academics have formed their own club and they start operating at a particular level, such that an individual in the street who's got a matric or even a junior degree finds it extremely difficult to read a journal article and understand what these people are trying to say, because the language is pitched at another level. Now, I think it's a very important question that we ought to entertain, because it makes academic writing inaccessible to the general public, which is very problematic. Yes. When we do write, the intention ultimately is to make sure that whoever can read should be able to read and understand what the messages that we are trying to convey, and not for us to write for the elite. Because if that were the intention, then our research becomes extremely useless. You will agree with me that majority of people who are running your municipalities, who are running your towns, and some of these guys who sit in the parliament cannot even read your journal article and understand what you are talking about. Yeah. So you need really to bring the language down to an understandable communicative style. And at times what we do is make sure that out of academic writing, either your books, your journal articles, and so on, we do put together something that we call policy briefs, which at times you will realize those are communicated at a language accessible to the majority of our people. So I'm going to stop it here so that we don't, we allow other people to continue. Thank you, Oscar.
Awesome, awesome. Over to you, Brian.
Thank you. I think I'm going to talk more from the point of view of a student.
Yeah.
Not much from the point of view of a supervisor, because the two profs have already said a mouthful. Let me start by going back to the point which I shared earlier on when I spoke about the relationship between a student and a supervisor. I think about 2 years ago, I was assisting a certain lady with her study. In fact, she was busy with a literature review. And the biggest problem there was a lot of back and forth between myself and her and the supervisor. And one thing I saw there was that she somehow took a stand which was more of a negative stand between herself and the supervisor. And I mean, if one wants to make sure that you're going to finish in that 2 or 3 years' time, you somehow have to make sure that you are able to navigate between your relationship with your supervisor and your relationship with yourself and your study. Otherwise, you'll just find that the study just becomes something that is very depressing and you are frustrated. And that is the first point I wanted to share. The second thing I can talk about is commitment, discipline, and focus. If one lacks these three, then you are sure that you are going to take so many years before you can even finish what you are trying to achieve. And I honestly feel that at times people stand to separate themselves from the study by means of not being disciplined. Then at the end of the day, when the supervisor is supposed to go through your, whether it's your proposal or your dissertation itself, it becomes a problem, and things have to go back and forth as if the person who was even writing this thing doesn't even know what they are writing. Whereas if one was disciplined and you remained committed to even meeting the targets which you set yourself to achieve, then you are able to get to the point which you are supposed to reach, which is graduation. The next thing I can talk about is the fact that our studies become our responsibility as students. As much as one can have a supervisor and the supervisor can provide guidance, but if you are not independent, if I can call it that, you are focusing and more relying on the supervisor having to always come to you and say, we have to submit by this time, we have to do this by this time, and you are not even following on those deadlines, then it's a problem on itself. So I always say to students, if I'm assisting, I always say that your topic becomes like your partner in marriage. It becomes either your husband or your wife. And if you are going to choose a topic which you are not even sure about, where is this going, just because the supervisor gave me this topic, you just want to run with the topic, you just want to commit yourself. It's good at times because others don't even know what they want to study in their master's or even PhD. But it's very important to make sure that one chooses a topic which they know that they can stick to and remain committed to till the end.
Yeah.
Just a few other points. Professor Hanyane mentioned something while he was talking about reading, and it brought me back to this point that one needs to read to make sure that reading becomes their friend. You make sure that reading becomes key if you're going to make it as a writer, because if you are not a reader, then you will end up writing things which don't even have any audience to read. You will write things in such a way that people don't even understand what you're talking about. I mean, you enter MBA, you are writing a certain study. I mean, you have a good topic, but what you are trying to express is not even expressible, if I can use that word. You are just on your own way, writing something only you understand. So in simple terms, I'm saying the more we read, the more we are able to understand how to write, what to write, how to express ourselves, and when to express ourselves. One student asked me a question on Wednesday, no, not on Wednesday, on Monday, and they are trying to start their literature review. And the question was along the lines, how do you start with your literature review? How do you start writing your literature review? I found the question a bit interesting, if I can call it that. And my answer came after a very long thinking, because I wasn't even sure how to advise. But my advice ended up being like, one has to come up with some form of skeleton which you can only come up with after reading other people's work and reading books and whatever that you can get your hands on. So one needs to just develop a skeleton that shows a couple of topics that you are going to address. How am I going to address what it gets, its subtopics and all that. Only then can you come up with the meat to be put on those bones. Otherwise, if you are going to start with the meat and then the bones end up not having anything, or the meat just doesn't have any bones. Another thing I can talk about is the issue of practicality. I think Professor Netswera just mentioned this also when he mentioned that sometimes one writes something which other people don't understand. That I believe that's when he mentioned people in the municipalities and so on not being able to understand certain things. So I think it's also a big issue that one needs to look at and consider, to make sure that when you write, you are as practical as possible. People can understand exactly what you're talking about. You can come up with your high jargon and everything, but if people are not going to understand what you're talking about, your study being out of touch, then it's somewhat useless if it doesn't engage the reader. And to save the supervisor's time, I believe as a student, you need to make sure that you engage with your reading. You question what you have written. Does it make sense? I've written this. Is there any logical flow? If you are going to write the first paragraph and it doesn't talk to the second one, doesn't talk. I believe supervisors can even end up being, losing interest in what they are supposed to read. So it's very important for one to make sure that you maintain a logical flow and you read your work a couple of times before submitting, so that when you submit, at least you submit something that's decent in nature. How do we do that? Sometimes we can talk about avoiding very long sentences. Professor Hanyane spoke about the use of many commas. You write, you have many commas, the sentence is about, the paragraph has 3 or 4 sentences which only have about one sentence that has 4 lines. You can imagine sometimes if you can have one sentence with 4 lines that can be summarized into even less than 10 words. So we need to make sure that if you can summarize as much as possible. For some studies, you can even make use of tables and graphs to make sure that you can capture the interest of the reader. So if the field or the study does allow the use of tables and graphs, I rather use that as compared to just writing 50 pages only containing paragraphs without anything that breaks the ice. From time to time, one needs to make sure that you are able to break from what you are writing. And just to summarize this point, I always say that at times, less is more and more is less. You can write a long paragraph that doesn't say anything. Whereas if you were to just put it in just small sentences, it captures the mind of the reader, and then you just get your point across so that they can move to the next thing that you've written. Thank you, Chair.
Awesome. And one of the things that stand out for me with all the points that are being shared, it's a common thing that spreads to all types of writing. We normally say, as a writer, you need to respect your readers. And one relevant word that I will use is that as a writer, an academic writer, and especially for those that are doing their dissertations and stuff, you need to respect your supervisor as well. Borrowing the point that Professor Hanyane made earlier on, that sometimes one just scrabbles through the work, just rushes to meet the deadline, but you're not respecting your supervisor by giving them assessed work. Let's take our work serious. Let's value the work that we're doing, and the next person, when they touch the work, they then respect you as well. And also another point that I picked from what has been said is, don't be afraid to make mistakes if you are going to learn from them, because you are growing. Professor Netswera mentioned something, that he was looking at the work that he wrote years back, and he's surprised to realize, is it him who was writing all those things? So those are some of the key things that, as we are having this conversation, I'm picking. But moving on to the next step, gentlemen, I'm going to throw in this question. Let's talk about the issue of plagiarism. I think that's one of the key things that does affect credibility in one's writing, in one's work. And earlier on, I was having a conversation with one doctor, and he was mentioning the issue of, there are certain topics that you can be going for that have got little information available, and you might bound to find yourself having less points to stress in whatever point that you want to make, but then there's less information available. So at the end of the day, one can be trapped into plagiarism and taking somebody's work and making it theirs, and that's somehow unethical writing. It's very unethical. But over to you, gentlemen. How can one overcome the issue of plagiarism? How can we deal with that?
Let me come in here, and I want to answer this question, but also just slightly, offer Brian as well as Lesego a solution on the problem of literature review.
Yes.
Okay. And this is what I always use as an intervention tool to my students. And perhaps Brian can help us do this quick activity. So Brian, if you have a pen and paper there, just put up for me, or Oscar, it's fine, you can do that. Just put up a table for me with about 6 columns. Okay, so the column lines will run vertical and then horizontal. Let's make the equal number of rows as well. Okay, and I want to call this the Hanyane matrix.
All right.
It's easy to come up with problems, but difficult to come up with solutions. So remember, I've said to you, you've got 3 boxes of sources, right? You've got the first box of sources. These are sources, these are must-have sources, must-read sources. Professor Netswera alluded to that. But there's the middle box that contains sources that you are probably not sure when to use these sources and when to read them. But somehow, these sources contain valuable information, okay? For instance, one article made up of 25 pages could contain 10 pages only of credible information. The rest, it doesn't work for you. Then you have the last box. That are sources you are not sure where it came from. And you've realized only about 2 pages per source on average is important for your referencing and use. But the rest, it's reading for the sake of reading. However, we must appreciate that sometimes when you read so as you can generate ideas, but not necessarily use a source as a source of reference. So you have those 3 boxes, and then you go to the matrix that we must agree needs to be used here to allow you to orderly categorize your sources, okay? So let's go to the table. How many columns? 6 columns, 6 rows, right? 6 columns, 6 rows. So the first column, we write the variable author, okay? So it will be Netswera F, you leave it at that, okay? The second column is title / theme. Some titles are long. You don't want to write everything. but you have a choice of including a theme there. This third column, it's discourse. Now, why do we have this variable discourse? It allows you as a reader to critically analyze and position the source in a particular paradigm, in a particular discipline. For instance, in public administration, we talk of new public management, we talk of governance, and we talk of neo-governance. Why is this important? It is important to allow one from a scholarship perspective to locate the source within the context of your argument. So if I say to you, for instance, NEPAD, Mbeki, and peer review mechanism, what comes to mind? Obviously, the paradigm of governance, the narrative of promoting good governance in Africa comes to mind. And this systematic positional thinking allows you to be relevant in your writing. Okay. How many columns do we have? We have 4, isn't it?
We have used 3 now.
We have 3. All right. Immediately, we move to the 4th column where we include the variable period. Okay. Why is the variable period important? In my discipline of public management and governance, the period dating 1993 to 2000 is important. You had the first democratic constitution, which today is used to validate the importance and by and large legal validity of other legislation. For instance, the recent ruling on the Electoral Act. What was the basis of that? It's section 18 and section 19 of chapter 2 of the Constitution. So here we are, already in our minds, we're beginning to fashion issues that must be included in the main argument. But in the end, it's important that, as Prof Netswera said, we also complement that with the art of writing. So my argument is, if the conceptualization is adequate and proper, writing becomes the natural complementary activity. Okay. What is the 5th part? It's contribution. What is this source contributing in your argument? What is it contributing in the broader scheme of things, in a particular paradigm, in a particular discourse? As Professor Netswera said, if your writing is going to be descriptive or analytical or critical, surely you need to establish which source from the beginning is taking a jugular vein approach. It's critical of a particular subject. And then the last column would be appropriateness and relevance of that particular source. So how many columns do we have? We have 6. Each source that you read, you need to fill in that column. Fill it up. What is the long-term advantage? Is that already from the beginning, you have started laying the foundation for a possible chapter 2, which is your literature review. And under contributions and the other variables, the minute you pick them up individually, you are already fashioning subheadings for chapter 2. So don't come to your supervisor and say, I'm struggling with literature review. I don't know how to propose headings and subheadings. Headings and subheadings come from the basket of your sources, which then answers the current question, avoiding plagiarism. You need to come up with your own descriptors, your own words, your own headings, your own subheadings. And when you use this matrix, like I said, you are quietly able to generate your own headings. If you take the column of contributions, for instance, you will then sit down and say, that source by Prof Netswera spoke critically about the influence of, I'm trying to think out of sociology here and not necessarily public administration, the negative influence, or the influence rather, not necessarily negative or positive, the influence of toxic masculinity. Which theory are you going to apply? What are the critical issues that emerge from such a discussion? From your own opinion, are you able to synthesize many a topic or subheadings and create a fresh topic out of that? That's what a literature review does. It must fill an existing gap in a body of knowledge, or better not, in an existing body of literature. So this is what I would give as a solution to students today in tackling this important activity from the onset. And once your proposal is accepted and the supervisor says, you can now start working on chapter 2, which, like I said earlier, is likely to be a literature review. Already, you know that Netswera is one of those scholars whose contribution in a particular debate cannot be missed. So he has become this critical voice. It's like me asking you who is the lethal soccer striker in the country. And some of you will raise the hand and say, it's the Kaizer Chiefs, Nurkovic. And then I ask why. Then you are able to explain his ability to position himself, his ability to be I'm trying to use creative words here, a poacher of note, and his control of the ball, and so forth and so forth. That comes out because you've been exposed to this body of knowledge or experience as such, which then, like I said, allows you to avoid the cardinal sin of using other people's work as if they are yours. Misrepresentation of work, in this instance, plagiarism. But what is interesting is that in most universities, including my own, once you submit a research proposal, it needs to go through certain phase. Amongst others is language editing, but amongst others is your subjection to turn it in to determine the veracity of similarity in terms of text and index. That is critical. And most universities have built this instrument to be able to avoid exposure of postgraduate students to this malaise. But again, remember, as academics, we know each other. I know that so-and-so in a particular university is a specialist in a particular area. So as I receive this research proposal, it cannot be that a student will be writing on HR and quoting somebody who we all know is a specialist in public finance. Okay, it raises issues. So all of this collectively are issues that, as much as we expose students to training in plagiarism, we also expose them to turn it in, to do it individually, and yet submit the turn it in report. If turn it in is used here. I am aware and appreciative of the fact that there could be other tools, but as supervisors, we are in a position to pick up such anomalies as and when they happen.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Prof.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Prof. Hanyane. I just want to, I don't want to repeat the points that you've already made, otherwise we'll eat too much time. I just want to say a few things in relation to plagiarism. And one of those is the following, that you know, the more you write, the less you are likely going to plagiarize. Because I'm going to use an analogy of driving a car.
Yeah.
Now, when one, and I've seen this with many students come to me, I don't know where to start, I don't know what to do. And I ask them, this is the first question I ask when I meet a group of postgraduate students who are supposed to write dissertations. I say, have you ever seen a dissertation? Do you know what it looks like?
Yes.
And most of them will tell you, no, I don't know. How is it? How does it look like? And I say, we cannot have this conversation until you've seen and touched the dissertation.
Yes.
Go and collect them in the library, go and read them, go through them. And once you have done that, then we can have a conversation about writing a dissertation. Now, we cannot sit and talk about riding a car or driving a car, and you have never seen a car, or you have never been next to a person who's driving a car. It becomes impossible. Now you've got to sit next to somebody who's driving and you see how he controls the pedals and steer the steering wheel at the same time. Next time when you meet other people and they say, let's talk about driving a car, you know exactly what you're talking about. Now, this is what I do all the time with students. I say, go to the library, collect the dissertations. And I think this should happen with all students. Students must go read extensively, especially on projects that have been written that relate to their own discipline, to the things that they want to research. Now, if you do that first, you are going to have very few questions to ask your supervisor, and you are also likely not going to plagiarize. Now, plagiarism is about cheating. You want to cheat, you want to cheat time, you want to finish quickly, you don't want to spend too much time engaging literature, you feel you don't have enough time to invest in your research work. And that's why you want to go and cut and paste and go and steal other people's ideas. Now, there are ways and methodologies of avoiding that. One is that you should read extensively. You should plan and give yourself enough time to carry out your study. And a lot of people don't want to go that route. It's exhaustive and it is indeed tiring. But there are other ways that you can use, other methodologies you can use in order to make sure that you minimize plagiarism. One is that you've got to write in your own words. Use your own words when you write. Don't write while looking at what other people have written down, because that is likely going to drive you to copying that which others have written. Use your own words, write in your own words. Where you do find work similar to yours, work that interests you, make sure that you acknowledge it in the text as well as in the reference list. Do that at all times. And one of the biggest problems our students are faced with is that they would go and find works somewhere, either in an article or in a book, they want to make use of that work. They put it, they copy and paste, or they paraphrase it and put it in the body of their writing, and they don't immediately acknowledge that author. And you find at the end of the dissertation, they've got works that they have copied somewhere, and they don't know where these works come from because they failed to acknowledge at the very beginning.
What you're saying is meeting.
Oh.
Where do I press?
I think we have got. Can we ask Bully to mute? Yeah. So yes. So colleagues, I'm just going to leave it at that, and to just encourage students, especially those that are beginning, to attend academic writing workshops. There are quite a lot of workshops that do take place in our individual universities. Some might be happening independently of universities to guide you on how to write. Some universities have got even a formal short courses on how to engage in academic writing, and they will give you guidance on what to do, where the pitfalls are, and you've got to look out for those things. Thank you, facilitator.
Oh, great. Brian, any contribution on that one?
No, I'm fine on this one. I think the two profs have handled it. Yeah,
fairly so. Yeah, there are some questions that are coming through, and I just want to say to everyone who's got a question, please drop in your question on the chat box, and we can take on those questions now. I'm just going to drop one question to our panelists before we focus on the questions that are coming on the chat box there. There is somebody now, it's profs, there's someone here, they've done their dissertation, they've been doing their work specifically for, for their, make sure that they're done with their career, they get their qualification, but now they want to move from that place of just writing their dissertation. They want to commercialize, now they want to write at a commercial platform. How can one, translate their work into that? What are the publications strategies that are there? The pros and cons in terms of publication as well of your work, where now your work is now available to the entire world to make use of it. What are the, some nudges that you can just share with everyone?
Okay, so let me run with that quickly. In some universities, it's sort of like beyond a norm. It's more a requirement that before you graduate, you need to have published part of your work as an article in an accredited journal. Okay, so that's the first mini exposure to commercializing your work. But the other lesser popular method is to take your entire work and convert it into a book. I've seen colleagues in other universities who have successfully done that. And what is interesting is that a number of so-called research organizations or publication houses coming from places like Germany and so forth do actually encourage postgrad students who have recently qualified and have completed their research work to expose the entire manuscripts as a book for publication. So those opportunities are plenty. It's not an issue. The issue is, do students prefer to publish bits of their work in accredited journals, either independently or with their supervisors? There's another burning issue there, because we've seen in other universities reports, especially in the public media, where a student will say, I never gave the professor the permission to publish my work, only to realize that there could be a prima facie case that strongly suggests that the professor actually invited the student to co-publish, but the student was reluctant. And because professors are required to publish timeously, he might have taken this forward. If there is such a relationship, the best thing to do is obviously to get permission from the student to say, I am giving the professor the permission to publish this work. I do not have interest in publishing the work. So some kind of consent must be provided. It's the last resort. I would encourage that. Instead, I would encourage students taking charge of their work. After all, it is their work.
Awesome, awesome. Okay, there's a question here from Yolanda. Yolanda Davis says, this matrix is really interesting, Prof, and I would like to use it and apply it. Is there a way you can make it available?
Professor Hanyane is muted.
Yeah.
This technology.
You are muted again.
Unmute. Okay. Are we fine now?
Yeah, now we are fine.
So everyone else who's part of this discussion and interested in how we can apply the metrics, can I ask them to forward you their email addresses? Okay, is that possible?
Yeah,
and then possible. You forward them to me so that as early as tomorrow, one can fashion a good example, right? With notes to accompany that example.
Yes.
I must indicate to the audience that if you look at the quick model that we worked on here, 6 columns, 6 rows, the type of variables will differ according to the topic and the subject. Some variables will appeal to you as the writer. Some variables might not, given the nature of the research, the nature of what we call the unit of analysis, which is the object of study. And some studies are so complicated that they accommodate what we call a unit of observation, which will require more intense engagement with your body of literature. So I need to write notes on that. And I think we can provide a model and notes together, package it nicely.
Awesome. Yeah. All right. No, thank you so much for that, Professor. Professor Netswera, I'm going to give you this question. This is Pinky says, I think this is a comment. I'll read Pinky's comment, then I'll go to Rada's question. Pinky says, one of the useful analogy I learned in a writing course is that literature review is like sitting in a dinner table where you first sit and listen to all the voices sitting around the table, what they have to contribute to the topic. After listening and learning from them, you have to express your views and understanding, including showing relevance to your work and critically reflecting on what was said. Now, that's a very profound contribution there. And then Rada asks a question and says, it is very hard to criticize. How to build confidence to criticize. So I think the question here is on how do you build confidence in criticizing?
Yes, I think those are 2 questions. Let me try and deal with them. One that Pinky is raising relates squarely to the question I had raised earlier on, the analogy about driving a car. Because for you to have an opinion on something, you ordinarily should have understood, read, and get exposure on the phenomena you want to engage. So there are quite a lot of people who are very opinionated. They think they've got opinions. They just want to talk. They want to be heard. But it's not, in academia, it's not necessary. It's not important. We want to hear you. We don't want to listen to you because you've got a voice. We want to listen to you because you are talking sense. And because you can take one and make two. Now, if all you talking is hot air, it really doesn't help us much. Now, what we ordinarily and normally request students to do is, number one, go and source as many dissertations as possible. And there are databases where dissertations are published. For argument's sake, if you go to the Nexus database, which is housed at the NRF, you get a list of all dissertations that have been undertaken in South Africa. And you can look at dissertations that have got topics related to yours. Go and scan through those dissertations. Find out whether or not they've already addressed the questions that you are raising. In which case you might be replicating some studies, or in which case you may be able to identify a gap that everybody else has not been able to address. So it becomes extremely important. Go and read the theories that talk about the phenomena that you want to address. Now, a student come to me and say, I want to research unemployment. I immediately say, oh, what are the theories on unemployment? And then you realize, oh, the student doesn't have an idea. I think as soon as you identify the problem, look at the theories. And by theories, what we mean is that there are a lot of conclusions that have been entered into, that have been drawn by previous researchers. And they take those conclusions as a norm. So they say for unemployment to happen, these conditions should prevail. So you would find a lot of research that we are doing is generally not new. We are replicating research that has been done in New Zealand, in Germany, in Brazil, but the context might be different, you know? So it is important to go back and look at all of that. Now, the second question that is raised relates to building confidence and not crushing the writer. Now, you will agree with me that a lot of professors are under duress. They are very stressful. The likes of Professor Hanyane are very stressed. They are making piles of papers and they are reading numerous dissertations, and they easily get frustrated at times. And if they don't guard themselves well, they do lash out, you know, because sometimes they read this piece and they asking themselves, what is this student thinking? Well, this is nonsense. And sometimes they even articulate that in writing. I've seen it written down that what you are writing is rubbish. It's nonsense. It doesn't make sense. I think it is born out of frustration and anger, anxiety. Academics are people who are overworked and underpaid. So those things do happen. But what we coach our academics to do at all times is to be of cool heads, so that when they go through the work with a fine comb, they try by all means to look at it in the same way that they look at their own baby trying to walk, you know, for the first time. And be patient and understanding, because we all come from there. Like I said earlier on, when I look at my master's dissertation, I can't believe I wrote it. So we ought to be patient, and it's a style. It's a style that over time you can master. And once you master that style, it also helps you when you manage other people, because you look at management as a developmental tool and not as a tool to flog other people who are doing bad, but to continuously help those who need help so that they can continuously improve as well. It teaches you to be patient. It teaches you to be calm and to understand that there will always be mistakes. So we do encourage of all of our academics. But you must also recall that there isn't generally a course out there that is intended at training supervisors. So majority of people are going to supervise you in the way that they were supervised by their professors. So if they had a very rude professor, they're going to be rude to you. But some universities are trying these days. They try to put a short course of 1 day or something like that to help supervisors understand that these are the good supervisory norms and standards, you know. So those things are very important. Thank you, facilitator.
Great. Professor, just still on you. I indicated the question on publication, and I see it comes back also on our chat box. Somebody's asking, can you share some more pointers in terms of publishing your work? So maybe from your side, I know Professor Hanyane touched on it a little bit. From your side, some pointers in terms of publication.
Yes, I've managed the publications at the publication house, UNISA Press. I've also managed a journal specifically as the journal editor. So the important things that we need as editors of journals or editors or directors of publication houses is the following: that when you want to publish your work, go through the requirements of the publishing house or the specific journal. Every journal has got its own requirement. They will tell you about the writing style. They will tell you about the referencing methods. They will tell you about the structure of the article, how it should be structured. They will tell you about word count, how many words your article should have. They will tell you where to place your graphs and tables and things like that. Now, please, do yourself a favor and just spend a few minutes running through all of those things and look at what it is that a particular journal wants. If you were writing a book or a book chapter for a publishing house, you will see that usually a publishing house will dedicate somebody specifically to coordinate that project as a project, as a book editor or project leader. That person will continuously guide you on the length of your chapter, how the chapter should be structured, how the book should be structured, etc., etc. So when we write, we need to be cognizant of the requirements of the outlet that we are going to utilize and its requirement. At another stage, we ought to be cognizant of the accessibility of the language that we are going to use when we communicate with particular audience, so that we structure our works accordingly. Thank you, facilitator.
Great, thank you so much. Brian, any contribution on the issue of publication? Brian?
Sorry. Let me pass this one. I think it's covered.
It's covered. All right.
Yeah.
Just going
Oscar,
on to the last. Okay.
Oscar, before you, I see there's a question from Haruna, and he's been patiently being with us.
I was actually going to that question actually. But
can I deal with it here quickly? And he asks, is there a standard structure of academic writing? And the answer is a big no. Yes. Right? And I caution most of my students about this. My discipline, public management and governance, relies heavily on literature coming from America. It's for obvious reasons. The American society has invested tremendously on writing and publications, and besides, there are many. Okay? And they see themselves as the benchmark setters, to use that term very carefully. And more often than not, we have been influenced by their academic/political developments. For instance, the movement from the generic process in South Africa to new public management started in America, right? So you're likely to get American publications that, for instance, words that we use as South Africans with the symbol S, with them, it's a Z. Okay? That's a style of writing. And then comes the practical yet pertinent ordering of words as part of building a syntax. And it's quite interesting. Since we've started, we haven't used words like syntax, words like rigor, and we should have applied these words by now. And I'm glad Haruna raised this issue to say, can UK English, US English, South African English ever be compatible? And from a writing perspective, the answer is a big no. And when you get exposed to these sources, it's important. Folks, we're going back to that matrix again. Who is Professor Netswera? He's a South African. He is bound to be influenced by a South African dialect, right? For lack of a better description, which maybe it's influenced by his own traditional norms and values. You know, as a Tsonga person, whenever I greet you, Oscar, I must spend the first hour talking about the weather. And then hour two, we now get into business. And I see Haruna is there in Japan, by the way, very interesting. In Japan, when you go there to do business, the first order of business has nothing to do with the boardroom. You must be pampered. Then you can talk business. Yeah. You know, it's these points of references in the end that most certainly will shape how we write. I made a point in passing earlier on of using what we call a vignette. Okay? And I'm encouraging your audience to go and do a bit of research around that. What is a vignette? In public administration and management, we take the softer route of using what we call case studies, right? But again, these case studies could be actual cases or hypothetical cases. Either way, it reflects a particular trajectory. As Professor Netswera said, you are either narrative in your character of writing or descriptive.
Yes.
So all of these positions are influenced by a number of things. Syntax is the other. Writing culture is the other. One thing that we need to inform our audience is that when it comes to academic writing, people must not write as if they're talking. I think Prof Netswera alluded to this point. Very important. Don't use slang, the informal language. And surely I'll be frustrated. And I always tell my students, when I'm reading your proposal and something says to me, go and make tea, then you must know you're in trouble. You must know you're in trouble. When I start reading your proposal, I've shut down. My phone is on silence. My door is closed. I want to talk to your work. Okay, I'm tempted to say I want to talk to you, but that would be something else. But I want to talk to your work. So invariably, I am talking to you through your work, and your work must be your mouthpiece. And that transition must be managed well.
Wow, wow. No, that's very profound. There's a question here from Lisejo, and Lisejo is asking, let me just quickly read through. Okay, let me start with Lirato's question. She says, hi, I want to understand, as a master student, raise my views, or it's always about making a view based on what other people say?
Yeah.
To Prof Netswera.
Yes. Now, this is very important because your voice becomes, I would say, a thread that knits the cloth. Now, you are navigating a minefield, and as you're doing that, your own voice is the one that guides us. Now, you need, therefore, to understand where to voice your opinion, how to voice your opinion, where to critique, criticize, compare various opinions that are coming from various authors. So you are a mediator, you are a medium that is conveying a message. And the message is not 100% yours. The message is about voices that come from different angles, from different authors. And what you're doing is you're bringing together all these voices. Some concur, others collude, others conflict, and you are trying to map out to us a particular picture regarding the issue that you have put on the table as the topic of your research. So your voice becomes very important because you are telling us so and so is saying this about this topic. However, there is this other one who has researched the same thing, but he came up with different conclusions. And why is it that they came up with different conclusions? Maybe the setting was different. So you are thinking through all this literature that you are engaging, and you are trying to give us a picture of what is happening. When you go and write the findings, there you are also equally at liberty to voice your own opinion and say, this is what I found, this is what I did, this is, and you again want to relate this which you found to what other people have said back there in your literature, and say, cross-reference things and say, although I found this, however, somebody else who has researched a similar phenomenon found differently, and this is what they said. So your voice is extremely important. Without your voice, there would be no dissertation or thesis or a book. It cannot happen because your voice is the one that is knitting this cloth, so that at the end of the day, we've got a shirt that we call a thesis or a dissertation. Thank you.
Well, no, that's great. No, thank you so much. I'm going to take the last question because of our time. We have already passed our time. So one question that I'm going to take, and I will lead us into concluding remarks. So this question from Lisejo. Lisejo says, what are Prof's views on the use of articles in current studies because of the inability to access libraries and less e-books and publications?
Yeah, let's tackle that quickly.
Any of you professors can just hit it, or you can both take it.
The last thing you want to do is to tell your supervisor, I can't access articles. Never. Don't even think about it. Don't. It's a big don't. Okay? Prof Netswera came short to telling us that there are accessible electronically based databases. He spoke about Nexus database. Get hold of that. And speaking of Nexus, if you don't mind, this is what Nexus does. It gives you a complete collection of legislation. Okay? As a public administration student, this is your Sangoma sack. If you don't have it by your side, there's problems. Okay? So you've got Nexus, you've got Emerald, right? Spelled as much as the name of the casino in Val. Okay, Emerald. You have INET Bridge. Those guys who are studying disciplines like your geography, your economics. This is one database that gives SAPC up-to-minute data on currency movements, on weather, right? Subscribe. Then you have Sabinet. You know, these are popular databases. You have EBSCO. And now that we are gradually lifting regulations, I cannot wait to see librarians also joining us, coming to work, say in the morning until midday. Have a relationship with your subject librarian, but make sure that your key words are precise. That there's this English word that we romanticize precision with, succinct, spot on. So your subject librarian must not have difficulty when he or she is supposed to send you those articles. In some instances, they will say, we have sent 15 articles, but we have also sent a full list of articles of about 50, because we don't know how many you like, and we have to say these other students. Don't make the burden of searching for sources the subject librarians. It's yours. Be the hunter that you are. And don't, folks, go out there, do everything in your power. In Pretoria, you have the so-called National Library. Walk in there, affiliate with that library. Ask your library if you can do interlibrary loans. A student must not come to a supervisor and say, I could not find this source. And speaking of that, some of us had a very fortunate yet strict experience. You know, my former supervisor, both masters and PhD, was the same person who insisted I need to be supervised by him. And we had struck this beautiful relationship. Each time I would go to him to look to collect my feedback, he would put sources on his table, pick up a phone and phone the subject librarian. Hanyane is here, transfer all those books to him.
Wow.
Not every supervisor can do that. Not every supervisor can do that. So do yourself a favor. Be the hunter. Go out there. And please, that ruling, if I hear Lesego says, and he qualifies this question, current studies. Current means 5 years. Your proposal must be dominated, underline the word, dominated by sources that were published at least in the last 5 years. And it's the unwritten rule that we don't pass it on to students, unfortunately. A person will talk about 200 and, what's the number of municipalities in the old days? 286. The current number now is 257. What are you talking about? What are you talking about? That demonstrates to the reader, to the supervisor, that you have not done your work properly. So reflect on current developments. And where possible, you know, a good supervisor, like I said, will give you those 6, 7 articles. But don't expect him to be your male boy. He's not. He'll never be.
Wow, wow, no, that's awesome. Because of time, I know time is not on our side, but I think a lot have been, shared, and all the questions so far that we had have been tackled. And I know some questions might develop. I just want to say to our viewers, our panelists, they are very reachable. They are very reachable people. So just hit my inbox, and then we can make sure that you get in touch with them. So make sure that you put all your email addresses on the chat box. I'm going to forward them to the professors, and then as they put together that matrix, we'll be able to share it with you. Just in closing remarks, and I'm going to, go into a very kind of like controversial angle that I'm going to take. I learned that from Professor Hanyane to be controversial sometimes. But in your closing remarks, and I'll start with Brian, that we have spoken a lot about academic writing, but I want us to bring it to African context. We've got somebody like Emmanuel is all the way from Japan joining us, but I understand he is from Ghana, if I'm not mistaken. But he's connecting with us, and we've got so many people from different places. But let's bring back, and these are some of the. It's Nigeria. He has corrected me. People have connected. And in all the things that professors you have said, Brian, you have shared, there is a point that came out when Professor Hanyane was mentioning the issues of sources, that it's like the foundation is coming from the West. It's coming from USA becoming the standard. How can we encourage our African brothers and sisters to take over? Let us give our own narrative, of certain things. Let us write our own story in our African context. Let us, I was listening on TEDx some months ago, a presentation that was talking about the African story from two sides, the two sides of the story, because you find a narrative about a certain, perspective being given from maybe a Tsonga contest while you are dealing with a Tswana issue. So let's take possession of our conversation. But how can we do that? So in your closing remarks, whatever that you want to share with our viewers, but please just try to touch on that, how we can inspire our African brothers and sisters to push on into academic writing. Brian, I'm starting with you, then I'll go to the professors.
Okay, I'll just raise 2 points. Number one being something that is common among all three of us, something that we share. Reading, reading, reading. The more we read, the more we'll be able to identify all those gaps that are there, what is happening in the West, and what can be applied here back at home. And the second thing is collaboration. You talk about Emmanuel, the Nigerian guy who's in Japan at the moment. Yesterday, he called me and we had engagements about quite a number of things, including politics and all that. So you are able to identify common themes between South Africa and Nigeria through collaborations, and because both of us are also doing some reading in the background, but if you have some background reading, then you can be able to apply here back at home. But if there's no reading, you don't have any background, you want to apply something here and you want it to be used, and you want others to be able to apply it in other areas, then there might be some form of disconnect.
Awesome, awesome. Prof Netswera.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, colleagues, for engaging. I think the engagements have got to continue beyond this. There is a lot, there are quite a lot of students, a lot of supervisors that needs to be reached, and we need to engage continuously so that you don't wallow in your own corners and suffocate and die. There are quite a lot of students who drop out because they don't get the necessary support. And we need to make sure that we've got networks that help them beyond just the supervisors. As I said earlier on, most supervisors are overburdened and they are not able to give you full attention, to give you the support that you deserve, So we need really to continue having engagement of this nature so that we can support each other. So we also ought to continue and increase the outlets for publication in our countries, especially in the continent. The reason we rely mainly on Europe and America is because they've got way too many journals, they've got associations, they've got, we don't have most of those. And the majority of us are run to support those outlets. We need to start supporting our publication outlets here in the continent. But we also need to encourage each other to write. There are a lot of people who could be writing, who can write, who have got the potential, but nobody's out there encouraging them, giving them some support. So there is a gap that needs to be bridged, and we ensure that we continue supporting those who are interested, willing, and able. Thank you, Facilitator.
Awesome, awesome. Thank you so much. Professor Berry. Professor Berry.
Facilitator, thank you so much. Colleagues, thank you.
Unmute your mic.
I have. It's okay now. Yeah. All right. So I was saying, I think we've touched on a very important subject in the lifetime of postgraduate students. Academic writing is fundamental. It's very important. It will test the mettle, the stamina, the approach, the vigor that postgraduate students should always display at their disposal. But we did not advise your audience that studying is a solitary affair. Embrace it. Where you need to shut down from a social perspective, do it. It requires that sacrifice, but the price is immeasurable. Secondly, we spoke in the beginning, the need to inculcate the appetite to read and read extensively. I come from that background, like I said, where the supervisor will say, you know what, I really enjoyed reading your chapter, but I don't understand why the following sources were not included. And I would go back, sit down, have a cup of coffee, reflect on the comments, and I would realize this does make sense. And the next thing I do, shut down the cell phone, shut it down, and get down to business. And as we do so, make sure that there is a support structure around you. You know, I always make this reference that if you are properly married, right? Your partner must say, what time should I bring coffee? What time should I bring your meal? Can I be away, leave you in the house and go and do shopping? Can I take the kids away from you? You need that. Postgraduate studies is a demanding experience. Academic writing alone is a demand, but a demand that cannot be satisfied in isolation from all other postgraduate obligations. And of course, let's wish the best to your audience. And I'd like to believe we have started the relationship now, going forward. Myself, Prof Netswera, Brian, should be at a disposal at some stage. Sometimes it might be just a quick advice, but in the end, it takes the person to make the necessary sacrifices. Thank you for the opportunity.
Wow,
keep going.
Great. Wow,
and a good discussion indeed.
Wow, no, thank you so much. Words are not enough to thank you, professors, Brian as well, for making yourselves available, and everybody who joined in. in this conversation. Thank you so much for making time. And just to, for me to pour my heart in few seconds, the reason why we've got Tips Talk going on, it's because I want to propagate the issue of collaboration. I saw the coming of lockdown and us moving online with all the things that we want to do. I saw it as an advantage. Now, can you imagine we are conversing with people in different continents at the same time? That's how this, which looked like something bad and terrible, is working to our advantage. So we are going to continue, gathering people and sharing information. And the whole key thing is collaboration. So if this conversation was impactful to you, please just drop a comment on the chat box. And I'm going to open everybody's mic just for 5 seconds. If you could all be able to say thank you to our panelists. And if you want to get this recording, you can just visit my Facebook page, Oscar RC, or you can go on my YouTube channel, Oscar Rufaro, subscribe to the channel. You can also get other episodes that we have done on online studying, preparation for exams. They are there on my YouTube channel as well. And we are continuing with this conversation. So we'll be coming back to you next week. And I will advise in terms of the guests that are coming in and the direction our conversation is going. So thank you so much for making it tonight. Let's just, applaud for our guests, our panelists, for such an awesome time that we had with them. So everybody, thank you so much. Have a good evening. I got your emails as well.
Okay.
So thank you. Please keep warm for those that are in warm places. Keep warm for those that are in cold places, and enjoy your evening. For those that it's evening, if it's during the day, to you, have a good day.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Oscar. It's
yes.
Yeah, it's Lesego here. Just a parting shot.
Yes, Lesego.
Firstly, to extend gratitude to our academics there. It is not an easy path. It is not an easy path. But at the same time, I would like to echo Brian's words to say it only requires that commitment, it only requires that discipline, but it also requires reaching out because, in another platform, I've seen quite a number of fellow students, both at honors, masters, and PhD level, attempting to quit their studies because they are suffocating. They've reached points of suffocation and they do not know where to go. So, firstly, thank you, Oscar, for providing this platform, and to our guests, please open up to those students. I know I'll jealously pick out Prof Hanyane because we've been engaging quite a lot with him or in another platform. So I would also advise that socio or psychosocial support be one of the most entertained subjects, particularly in postgraduate studies, because remember that little bit of stress, that little bit of edge starts mostly from PG studies upwards, because once the psychosocial aspect is not dealt with, we're losing out on a lot of people with potential. We're losing out also on a lot of people who could contribute in different bodies of knowledge. So as a parting shot, Oscar, this is one of the psychosocial aspects that I'm dealing with, the platform that you've provided. It's part of that because, when you know that you've got internal and external support, it's much better. Internal, I mean your family, they know, they understand, they can't reach you at this point. But at the same time, when you know that when you cry out loud, you've got sounding boards that you can bounce your, your views, or you can also bounce your concerns at. So probably on behalf of the audience and everyone who could not make it through, we thank you, and let's continue to be there for not only for students but people who also want to write, because an idea can come from a person who's actually not a student, but they've got an idea that they want to publish out there. So
Wow,
thank you very
awesome,
much.
awesome.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Oscar. Can you hear me? Sorry.
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes. Thank you so much for putting out this wonderful and insightful platform. So I think it's exactly 1 a.m. here in Japan. So it's really quite difficult to actually participate in some African event. So because of time variation. So I think Japan and Nigeria is like 8 hours difference. Yeah. I think I would like to also extend my gratitude to Professor Hanyane. So I think you actually did justice to the topic, and also Professor Netswera. Yeah. I think it is quite enriching. And again, the other panel is my good friend Brain. So I think he also contribute a lot. And I think not taking much time. Yeah, Mr. Lesugo. So I think it actually stressed one of the points I wanted to stress. So because just imagine my supervisor. So the challenge, like most of us African students are facing in Japan, is that we usually drop out of our doctorate program. So because of stress, so because of our supervisor, psychosocial support. So we need that so much, because I was like discussing with Brain. I said, for the last 10 years, my supervisor had 10 students, and it's only 1 that graduated. 10 doctorate students, only 1 graduated. So the first thing he told me when I started my program was that I can't finish in 3 years. So my major is development economics, that I can't finish in 3 years.
Yeah.
That I can only finish in 4 years. But I was like telling him, Prof, I'm a government official, so I work with the Nigerian government, so I'm here on study leave. So I can't spend more than 3 years here. He said, I cannot finish in 3 years. So I was like telling him, Prof, are you threatening me? He said, no, that he had 10 students, it's only 1 that graduated. Then I asked, what happened to the rest that they left? Yeah, so sad. And most of them are African students. So imagine someone comes under a scholarship. Come under a scholarship. So he's given monthly stipend, and he left the program. So something is wrong.
Yeah.
So we need a lot of this kind of program, right? To actually educate ourselves, assist ourselves, to collaborate. So in terms of our publication, because my professor spent more than 20 years in the UK. So he did his master's there, doctorate there. So he has been working for more than 20 years in the UK. So it's UK standard. So everything UK. So most of his student, he wants his student to publish in top ranking economics journal, even both masters and PhD. So which is quite difficult, because some of those authors spend more than 10 years to publish in those journals. You are telling students to spend less than 1 year or 2 years to publish in those journals? It is really ridiculous. So thank you so much for putting out this wonderful event. Yeah, Mr. Oscar, I really appreciate that.
Especially now that we realize that we've got common challenges, though in different locations. It draws us more to that mentality that we need to collaborate, and we need to sharpen each other and hold each other's hands and make sure that we become successful and we take over in the platforms that we need to take over. So thank you so much, everybody, and thank you for your compliments, for the closing, words from everybody who have spoken now. It's really, really encouraging. Have a blessed evening, and God bless you.